What is the objective of model verification? Or objective in model verification is to be sure that the conceptual model in our mind is reflected accurately in the operational model. And we need to ask ourselves, are the assumptions of the conceptual model? For example, we will have some assumptions about the system components. We are going to assume that in a supermarket, actually there are maybe thousands of different products. However, in order to create a simple model to solve our problem, because if you want to create a complex model, then you need to spend much more time than creating a simple model. In this simple model, you are just going to assume that there are only 1,000 different types of products, not thousands of different types of products. So this is just an assumption about the system component. And there will be some assumptions about the system structure. For example, in the simulation, you are not going to assume that the products in the supermarket do not get any harm during the inventory time. Actually, they can get. Anybody can break a bottle of wine as they want to purchase it, right? So these are the real things. But when you are developing the simulation model, you are not going to introduce that fact into your model. So there will be some assumptions about the system structure, like no inventory can get harmed during the inventory time. And there will be some assumptions on the input model, such as probability distribution assumptions, and the parameters are going to be determined with statistical procedures or expert opinions, and abstractions and simplifications. So, as I have said, we should not try to model a system with a perfect detail. Okay, we cannot put every details about the original system. For example, can you simulate the human body? Can you understand what's going on in a human cell or in a neuron, for example? We do not have a complete understanding about that. So it will be impossible for us to model that perfect system. Now, how we can model it? But by simplifying it. So you need to simplify it, but you should not make it too simple such that it prevents develop a solution to the problem that you have. So in order to solve our problem, it should be enoughly complex, but it should not be more complex than it is needed. Okay? So with assumptions of the conceptual model, so we have these assumptions of the conceptual model, these assumptions must be reflected to the operational model that is computerized in the computer environment. So this is the verification process's objective. Now, there are a few suggestions about verification process, which I'm going to go over fast. I'm not going to explain in detail. You can read the details of these suggestions in your textbook, actually. One suggestion is to have the operational model checked by other simulation software experts. If you are developing your simulation model by only yourself, do not trust yourself too much. Okay, so it basically says that after developing the model, you explain the original system to some software experts, not the original system, but the conceptual model in your mind, and then ask these simulation experts if the model in your mind is reflected to the computerized environment. So they do not need to see the original system, for example, because at verification process, our objective is not to check if the original system is reflected to the computer environment. So you need to explain the thing in your mind, and the software experts must check if it is totally reflected to the software. Now, you need to check if the operational model takes the correct action for each event type. For example, by running animations, by using the animations provided by Arena, you can see if the Q discipline is perfectly applied. So you can change the parameters of the distributions, play around, and try to see if the system, if the model is going to behave as you expected. So for example, when you see an entity running through a decide module, is it going to the correct place that it is supposed to go? You need to check them by the animations. You need to examine the reasonableness of the operational model under a variety of input settings, which means you need to change the parameters. So, for example, when you increase the inter-arrival times, is the model going to behave or report results as you expected? Or when you reduce the inter-arrival times, is the model going to report results as you expected. So you can change the input models and input parameters to see if the model is going to behave expected, and you need to check the reasonableness of the model. Have the operational model display a wide variety of output statistics for examination purposes. So you remember from our applications in Arena, we were creating animations for the variables to see if the variables are changing correctly or not. So you can run, for example, plot diagrams as well. And also you can use the record module in Arena or other type of module such as assign module to collect statistics, interesting statistics, and that interesting statistics would be helpful to see if they are expected as expected or not by you. For example, you can collect statistics about the response times, the utilization of the resources, and the average number of clients, so on and so forth. But most of the statistics are actually provided as default by Arena, right? And we need to print and report the input parameters in the end of the simulation to be sure that these parameter values have not been changed inadvertently. So actually the input parameters you have introduced, we also need to collect statistics about these as well. For example, the inter-arrival times. You know that the inter-arrival times are exponentially distributed with a certain rate or average. But if you also take statistics about these inter-arrival times as well in your simulation procedure, you can be sure that these random variations that are generated are correctly representing that input model. Now, especially in short simulations or in simulations where we need to generate from a random distribution only a few times, in that case, it is a good idea if you check these values, because the random variable is just going to be generated a few times. Maybe you are going to observe extreme values, not values close to average or sensible to the probability distribution. So these extreme cases may be observed in the simulation, and the simulation results can be wrong as well. So you also need to check the input parameters as well in your reports. Now, for the comprehensiveness and completeness, make the operational model as self-documenting as possible. So if you develop a perfect model which can be representing the model in your mind, if you create a perfect model, that would be good for you, but not good for the other simulation experts, because they are not going to be understanding your model. So for the completeness and comprehensiveness, it says, try to document that model, try to explain everything. When you create a module, for example, just put an explanation below it. It is possible in Arena to write text in your flow chart as well. So if you write these explanations in your model, then the other simulation experts who are going to use your model can understand what your model does as well. And again, we need to check the animation of the simulation model if it is an animated operational model, to understand if the dynamics are reflected in the conceptualized model in your mind into the computerized environment. You can use an interactive run controller, which is IRC, or a debugger, simple debugger, to check if there are any coding mistakes. And you can use graphical representations to ease the verification process, such as plot diagrams. And you can also use them to validate in the validation process as well. So some of these suggestions can also be used in the validation process as well. And you can use a trace. What is a trace? Trace is basically recording every entity data. Okay, for all entities in your simulation model or simulation replication, it records all history. So it is basically a very, very, very large spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, the behavior of the entities. So when did they enter the system? When did they enter into the which process, so on and so forth. So this trace is recording every important event into a spreadsheet. Okay, so you can use that trace option. But I mean, if you are an expert in coding in Arena, for example, you can run this trace option. So the time that the certain event occurs for a specific event as well, not all events, but you can use the record module, for example, just like we have done in our applications in Arena. You can use the record module to record a specific event's history. For example, the departure time of every entity, one by one, you can record that data. Or, for example, the duration between two locations of this production system. So the time between the exit from a certain machine and the entrance to a certain machine. So the time between two different machines, how much time spent by each product. You can also trace that. So it depends on the knowledge of the expert on the software actually. But trace is a nice thing to do if you want to see if your model that you have computerized in your software is reflecting the behaviors in your model.